Thor, the god of thunder, is the best off-tank in Marvel Rivals. Thor himself does not play particularly well as the only tank on a team, but he is the best option to pick as a secondary tank. You already have one of the big blockers. While Thor doesn't have the best mitigation, he is a bruiser that will slam into the enemy team, disrupt their movements, and cause them to second guess making advancements onto your team. Thor's basic attack is Mjolnir Bash, where he smashes the target with his hammer in a rotation of 4 hits. The damage is acceptable, though not extraordinary. The nice thing about Mjolnir Bash is that it goes through most tanks' blocks, and it does a decent amount of damage to things like root walls. Thor's right-click ability is his hammer throw, where he'll launch Mjolnir forward and deal damage to a target within 23 yards in a straight line ahead of him. Now the hammer throw does an okay amount of damage, but it's pretty much always better to use Thor's shift instead of throwing the hammer, unless you're really trying to take out a target that's running away from you and is at low health. Or if you're trying to bust through an enemy tank wall and you're not confident that you're able to charge in at this current point. Tossing a couple hammers in to help your damage dealers break shields or deal extra damage can actually help. Thor's left shift ability is his main form of movement and the main attack he's going to use in combat. Holding down left shift, he'll begin twirling the hammer, which will charge it up. When released, he'll launch himself towards his cursor with a velocity and distance based off how long you charged up the ability. Upon running into an enemy, you're going to deal a chunk of damage to them as well as shove them backwards the remainder of the distance that you have to fly. The main two uses for this is to get yourself into combat. If you're a distance away, you can spin it up, pop out around a corner and go flying towards your enemies, getting right into melee range and being able to do some damage. Or you're going to use it as a shove attack, pushing your opponents around and making sure they don't have the movement patterns that they want. A good example is getting behind the enemies and shoving them towards your team so they're easier to take out. Good Thors are repositioning their opponents non-stop, causing them to lose confidence in their defensive line, making sure the healers have to put themselves in a more risky position to help their allies. When you're in danger and trying to get out of harm's way, constantly using the shift ability to generate yourself 100 bonus HP as well as gain the burst of movement is extremely beneficial. Thor can be really slippery and hard to take out if you're able to block line of sight with quick dashes from this ability. Thor has a unique set where each of his abilities shares a cooldown, so whenever he uses an attack, he has to wait the full 3 seconds before he can use another one. Thor also has resources. In the middle of his screen, he has 3 hammers, and activating one of your skills consumes one of those hammers, which has about a 5-second recharge rate. Thor's passive is Thor Force. Whenever he uses one of his abilities, he's going to get about 100 bonus health to a maximum of 200 bonus. Thor Force also makes it so that after he uses a hammer, if he lands a melee attack on a target, he will refresh the used hammer. This allows him to really bring on the pain when he's in melee range, constantly regenerating his hammers and being able to weave his attacks non-stop. You can basically constantly weave special, auto attack, special, and as long as you remain hitting targets with your hammer, you'll never run out of resources. Thor's E ability, Lightning Realm, puts up a big circle around him. Upon activation, he will regenerate a number of hammers equal to how many enemies are around him. The Storm Field will also cause any enemies that leave it to receive a slowing debuff. This can be very detrimental to enemy divers who attempted to come in and get onto your team. If you put up this bubble, they will be then slowed when they try to do their escape and easier to take down. You're going to use this ability most often once you've engaged into the enemy team to regenerate your hammers to full. While it does look like a shield, it does not provide any defensive value and it's exclusively a CC ability and resource regenerator. Thor's F ability, Awakening Rune, is really the core to his gameplay. Activating it, Thor awakens, and his basic attack becomes him hurling lightning at his targets. He'll no longer swing his hammer, and he'll gain a ranged basic attack. This form lasts for 5 seconds, and your melee attack will become a series of 3 lightning slashes. Awakening Rune requires all 3 of your hammers, so you must have fully generated hammers to be able to use this ability. A lot of your gameplay is going to be around using your other abilities to get yourself into the action and activating this Awakening Rune as soon as there's an opening and begin unleashing the light. Don't be afraid to use your other abilities in combat when you're waiting for your Awakening Rune, because as long as you land a melee attack, you regenerate the hammer that was expended to activating those abilities. There are 2 main options once Awakening Rune is active. You can attempt to break through the bulwark with the massive amount of increased damage that you're now dealing in a quick burst. This is particularly effective if the enemy is only running one single tank. There are not very many healers that can heal through the amount of damage of Awakening Rune, and if you have any DPS backup on your target, you should be able to take them down. The other option is to weave attacks past your targets and hit the enemies behind them. Landing big damage onto the enemy supports can draw their attention away from their frontline. Thor's ultimate, God of Thunder, causes him to raise up into the air, electrocute all enemies beneath him, and then after a delay, slam down for some massive damage. While you're in the air, you are able to move a little bit. You'll have a reduced movement speed, but you can chase down enemies that you were right next to that began to run away as you channel the lightning before slamming down. This attack is pretty obvious and pretty easy to avoid due to your reduced movement speed. The best suggestion is to wind up your hammer and throw yourself into the enemy team before activating the effect, and you're able to get more effective use of the lightning strikes before slamming down. Be wary though, Doctor Strange and Magneto's barriers and Hulk's AoE shield will all block the effect of the slam, making you do significantly reduced damage if the tanks are able to get between you and the other enemies. God of Thunder can be extremely influential on games, and if the enemy team has to group up on an objective at the very end of the game, a good God of Thunder will bring you the win. Also be careful, if you ever touch an out of bounds object while raising up with the ultimate, sometimes it'll just fizzle out and just not do anything. Thor has two different team up abilities. He is the beneficiary of Odin's Son Reborn from Hela. When Hela's in the game, if you've died and then she kills a target, she'll revive you at the place that you perished. As well, anytime she lands a killing blow while you're alive, you're gonna get a chunk of bonus health. This is one of the strongest team-ups and it's used quite a bit. Having a Thor revive in the middle of your team and then using God of Thunder to rain down damage upon everyone could flip the match for your opponents. Thor also gives out a team-up bonus to both Storm and Captain America, giving them more lightning-based powers. We'll go over what those abilities do in those characters' videos. The biggest thing to be wary about with Thor is that he is pretty easy to CC and take out. With his lack of shields or mitigation of any variety, Thor can easily be CC'd and taken out as soon as the enemy team is ready. Unlike the other tanks, he can't really stand between his allies and the enemy team and just absorb all of the incoming damage. He needs to be using terrain quite a bit more and repositioning enemies so that they're isolated. If Thor is disrupting the enemy team's movements, putting down slow fields, and tossing lightning hands, the enemy team is going to have a really hard time keeping their defensive form in place. Soak up a decent amount of damage, he'll gain a lot of attention with his disruption, and he can tank bust, all things that you want from your off tank. Thor's usefulness is really high in low-end lobbies, and it begins to drop off as you increase in difficulty of opponents. While by no means a weak character, you're probably going to use a lot less of Thor once you get to the higher ranks, but using Thor to get there is a great strategy. If you want a character with the opposite problem, that's really hard to learn in early ranks, but way more impactful into the high ranks, next time we're going to talk about the Green Giant himself, the Hulk.